channel community, and welcome to part 2 of my overview of Lee Hazlewood. Now in this video I talk more about the Lee Hazlewood discography and Lee Hazlewood as a solo artist. So if you want more biographical information and some of the other artists he worked with, go back to part 1, but this is where I actually kind of show my Lee Hazlewood records and talk kind of about each one. Now, going back to the late 50s and early 60s, he was recording with Duane Eddy and having a lot of success there. Also working with Dino, Desi, and Billy. Well, he recorded a demo of some songs about a town called Trouble. So he recorded these songs and he sent them to one of his record label buddies, who went home and listened to the demos and basically said, there is nothing that we need to do to this music. I like it the way it is. I think it's great. And so that became Lee's first true solo album, Trouble is a Lonesome Town. Now this is the reissue on Light in the Attic. You're going to see a lot of these tags right here. Mine happens to be on a burnt orange vinyl, which is really nice. And it comes with a nice little book with young Lee there. But this is sort of a concept album, and Lee tells a story about this town called Trouble. And it's quite humorous, and it's kind of a country-flavored type album. This is the only album he did for Mercury Records, and this was in 1963 when it was released. Now, he later released this on his own Lee Hazlewood Industries label in the late 60s with a completely different cover, but that is the original. And so Lee recorded for a few labels, but by 1964, and I guess because of his association with the Rat Pack, he was with Reprise. And this is an album called The NSVIPs, Not So Very Important People. Now this is very similar to Trouble is a Lonesome Town. There's a lot of little narratives on here and sort of Lee's sort of songwriting and things like that. Al Casey is on this album. But it's a very traditional, kind of early, kind of folk country type thing. This came out in 1964 on the Reprise label. You can find a reissue of this. I'm not sure what label this is that put this out. It looks like Rhino. It has a Rhino, but I'm sure these are digital copies, and I think they're stereo. But yeah, they're good, clean copies, and you can find them for about $20. They're out there. And so that led to 1965 with the album Friday's Child. This came out on the Reprise label. Different songs about different people who don't know the difference. Again, this is one of those Rhino label reissues that came out a few years ago. But 1965's Friday's Child, which, funny enough, was later reissued as a completely different album called Houston in 1968, probably cashing in on the Lee Hazlewood sort of, I won't say Lee Hazlewood craze, because I don't think Lee was ever like a huge star, but this is the Harmony label, which was a part of Columbia, which is really interesting. So I don't know exactly what pressing this is. I don't think this is 1968. This is probably a later pressing. But as we'll go into this, Lee recorded for several labels that put out his music. But this is the same album. There went my microphone. Sorry about that. This is just a prop, by the way. It's somebody gave this to me for Christmas, and so I thought I would just put it here for the videos. So anyway, there's my microphone. Fake microphone. So anyway, after that, in 1966, and this is kind of as the Nancy Sinatra, These Boots Are Made for Walking, became a big hit. Well, MGM wanted to get in on the action, so they signed Lee to a deal. And Lee kind of called these sort of souped up demos. But this is the album he recorded. It's called The Very Special World of Lee Hazlewood. It also features his version of These Boots Are Made for Walking, which is really hilarious. His take on it is very different than Nancy's, but definitely worth hearing. But some beautiful songs like I Move Around. There's just a lot of really good stuff. Lush string arrangements and everything. Now this is an original mono copy that I was lucky enough to find on the MGM label. And as you saw in my Christmas video, I got the Light in the Attic reissue. Now this is a stereo, I believe, but yeah, this is an album that's readily available. After that, he did another album for MGM Lee Hazlewoodism, Its Cause and Cure. Now these albums weren't commercial successes at all. They were really kind of pretty much ignored. But Lee was still kind of enjoying the hits with Nancy and kind of taking the money that he was making off of the Rat Pack and stuff. There's a lot of rumors and stories about that and some of the things that went on. I'm not going to speculate on any of it, but you can imagine the record business in the mid-'60s. Lee was probably pulling down a few bucks. So the Nancy and Lee stuff was really blowing up. The Nancy and Lee album came out in 1968. And also, I believe this album, this is on the MGM. This is one of those MGM recordings. This is the third and final MGM album. This is Something Special. And I believe this album was only released like in Germany or something. It was not an American release. So by this point in time, I think MGM had kind of moved on from Lee Hazlewood. But more specifically, Lee Hazlewood was starting his own label, LHI, Lee Hazlewood Industries. If you go back to part 1, I showed the International Submarine Band. I'm going to talk a little bit more about LHI later on in this video and some of their artists. But I'm just kind of going through the discography right now. 1968, Reprise released this album. Funny enough, this is the same picture that was on the Houston album cover. Love and Other Crimes. This is a really, really good album. Again, this is one of those Rhino reissues. This hasn't been put out by Light in the Attic yet. But this is a bit of a concept album as well. And it's basically about, breaking up, which Lee talked a lot about in his music and his songs. But this is 1968's Love and Other Crimes. Now, here is an LHI original, and I'll be sure to show you guys the label. This is an album Lee made with Ann Margaret. So he moved on from Nancy here and did this album in Nashville, funny enough, The Cowboy and the Lady. Now, Lee always loved to call himself a cowboy. There is the LHI label for you guys. And so this is a rare album to find. I was lucky enough to find one tucked away at a record store somewhere. And it's a nice clean copy in pretty good shape. But never fear, this album was released by Light in the Attic as well. So this one is a fairly new copy. I think this came out just this past year. I've got the colored vinyl right there. So you guys like to see colored vinyl here. But Lee Hazlewood and Ann Margaret, The Cowboy and the Lady. It's kind of a psychedelic country album, if you will. But it's not like a psychedelic kind of freak out, but it's not country music. I wouldn't call Lee Hazlewood country music at all. But good duets and good songs, and fans of Ann Margaret, you guys have to have this album. I think it's a must. Another on the LHI imprint. This came out in 1969. This is 40, and there's Lee looking good on the cover of that. This is also a colored vinyl. This album featured a bit more lush sort of production, and was a bit of a reach. I believe there were no. This album has no Lee Hazlewood originals on it. This is Lee doing other people's songs. So this is kind of Lee not being the sort of guy in charge of everything. This is Lee in the hands of another producer and other arrangers. But it's very much got that Lee Hazlewood sensibility. Now, by this point, Lee was sort of skedaddling off the country, out of the country, and he was spending some time in Sweden. Now, there he hooked up with a filmmaker, and I'm going to read his name here because I don't know, and if anyone has any Swedish, you can correct me if I'm wrong. Torbjörn Axelman is how I believe you pronounce his name. Like I said, correct me if I'm wrong, but Mr. Axelman was a filmmaker and a director. And Lee got really interested in that. And so he went over to Sweden and he made this wonderful album, Cowboy in Sweden. And there is also an accompanying film. Now, I believe that is Mr. Axelman right there. But Lee went over there and sort of reminisced about life and love. And this, to me, is really a consummate Lee Hazlewood album, pressed on this wonderful blue vinyl. And I think if you just got just a good starting point for Lee Hazlewood as a solo artist, this might be the album to go with, and you can kind of branch out from there. But I think this kind of sums up everything that you would love about Lee Hazlewood if you did, in fact, love this music. This came out in 1970. There is a film, a DVD, and I think Light in the Attic has the DVD on some of these. But I think you can watch the film on YouTube. But the film was interesting because it had the George Baker selection, Little Green Bag. That was in this. And funny enough, I think Quentin Tarantino is a big fan of Lee Hazlewood and has used some Lee Hazlewood in some of his movie soundtracks. 1971. Now this is coming out on the Viking Reprise label. This is when Lee was pretty much recording in Sweden exclusively, had pretty much given up on American audiences. This is Requiem for an Almost Lady. And this particular album really is another sort of breakup, semi-concept album. And of course this has got the Lee Hazlewood Industries imprint on it, but I think originally this album had come out on a different label. Now these Light in the Attic reissues, they're all really nice. They come with a nice booklet. They're pressed really well. Staunton tip-on jackets. Really good quality pressings. So there was some more Nancy and Lee. The next album was not even supposed to be a Lee Hazlewood album. This is 13. And this album was not even supposed to be a Lee Hazlewood solo album. This album was actually recorded, and let me get the name here as well. This was, I'm pulling it out here, sorry about that. Larry Marks. And a lot of you know Larry Marks because he did the Scooby-Doo theme and stuff like that. Well, Larry Marks was recording for Lee Hazlewood Industries and had recorded this album of Lee music, and it was really kind of a funky soul kind of thing, a lot of horns and things like that. Well, Lee later on erased Larry Marks' vocals and put his vocals on top of it. And so the big criticism of this album is that these songs weren't songs meant for Lee Hazlewood to sing. They were meant for Larry Marks to sing. But I think it's a fun album. Look up the song You Look Like a Lady, which is the lead-off track on this album. And it definitely goes outside of the realm of comfort for Lee Hazlewood. It's got a great cover. I love the color scheme and everything. But yeah, Lee shaved the mustache, grew his hair out a little longer, and basically stole this Larry Marks record and reclaimed it, even though it was his songs and everything. So at this point, Lee starts releasing and recording several albums, and these albums I don't have. I may can show you some pictures down here throughout the video. But there is another Nancy and Lee album again that came out around the same time 13 did. An album for Capitol Records, Poet, Fool, or Bum. There is 20th Century Lee on the RCA label. Moving On, which is on the Polydor label. This is all in the mid-70s. 1977, Back on the Streets Again. And Back on the Street Again is the last Lee Hazlewood album that came out bearing his name. But there is an interesting soundtrack album. Mr. Axelman and Lee collaborated again for a film called A House Safe for Tigers. And this is Lee Hazlewood's soundtrack. Again, a Light in the Attic reissue. And there is Mr. Axelman's name. So you Swedish fans, Torborn, I'm assuming. But neither here nor there. This is a wonderful soundtrack album full of great orchestrations, like any soundtrack. But the song Soul's Island is a classic Lee Hazlewood song and recording. And so that kind of sums up the Lee Hazlewood story as far as his discography. Now, he did record some stuff in the early 2000s. He did release an album in 2006, right before he passed away, called Cake or Death. There's some live recordings that are floating around out there. There's a tribute album called Total Lee. And so there's a bit of that. But Light in the Attic kind of got into the Lee Hazlewood game by releasing this, the LHI years, Singles, Nudes, and Backsides. So this kind of gathers a lot of the Lee Hazlewood singles that were out. And I'm not going to show you the picture under here, but you guys can look it up. This was a Record Store Day release. And mine actually came with a patch, an LHI patch. There's only about 50 of these, but I can't show you any more than this. But I recommend starting with Lee Hazlewood with this. I mentioned Cowboy in Sweden as a great album, but this is really the best way to start with Lee Hazlewood if you're kind of interested in dipping your toes into the water and finding about Lee. A lot of the material on this is spread out through those albums that I just showed you, and this is a really, really, really nice place to start. Another Light in the Attic reissue that is really cool is this box set of 45s, You Turn My Head Around. This is a box set of 45s, and it features several of the Lee Hazlewood Industries artists, which I'm going to talk about in just a second, but Honey Limited, the Woodchucks, Anne Margaret, Susie Jane Hokum, which was Lee's girlfriend and partner at the time, a couple of Lee Hazlewood singles. And so this is a really fun set. I think you can still find copies of it out there fairly inexpensively. It includes a cool 45 adapter with the LHI logo on it, and also a puzzle. I'm not going to pull everything out of there just because, but it's a really, really fun set. Now, the real goal to the Lee Hazlewood reissue program, and give me a second, is this box set. The Lee Hazlewood Industries, There's a Dream I've Been Saving. Now this is a CD set. This is the deluxe version. I think you can get a smaller version that is just the CDs. This one, and I'll open it up and show you guys some of the stuff in here. But this is a really, really nice set. You've probably seen it in a few of my videos back behind me in there on the shelf. But really deluxe treatment. It actually has some vinyl pressings. I did not get the vinyl, but I'm going to open it up here and show you guys kind of what we're dealing with. But it's a coffee table book, basically, with a nice photo of Lee on the cover, and it features photos of all the groups, and it basically tells the story of LHI and kind of the goings-on, a lot of good essays, interviews. There's one with Susie Jane Hokum. Just different stuff. Of course, the CDs are housed in here. It also, the deluxe one includes the DVD of Cowboy in Sweden. There is also in here, like I said, mine has a little flexi disc 45, which I want to be careful about right there, of a Lee Hazlewood session. Got that tucked away in there. It's a really, really nice set. That's kind of the back cover with everything in it. The Lee Hazlewood Industries, Hazlewood Airlines, photo stills in there. I mean, it is a really nice package. And I believe this package was nominated for a Grammy. And so if you got the money to spend and are really wanting to go all out Lee, that is a wonderful place to start. It's got the Cowboy in Sweden and all of that. So like I said, if you got the money to spend and want to go for it, that's a great way to go. But also, Light in the Attic have been putting out a lot of the LHI records and releases. This one is Honey Limited, which was a girl group that he had on his label. It's got a little sticker with it. Here's another one, Arthur. Now, Arthur was kind of a folk artist. I don't know, folk, Baroque. Really interesting. This is Ash Gray. It's not one of my favorite albums on the LHI label. This is called Dreams and Images. Very sort of romantic type singing. This is a great record, The Kitchen Sink, When the Rainbow Disappears. This is all of the Kitchen Sink's recordings. Again, on the LHI label. This was just one of those bands that never really took off, but kind of a garage rock kind of sound. Really, really good, solid stuff. And finally, the last one I'll show here was the most recent one that came out. This was the Rose-Colored Corner, Lynn Castle. And Lynn Castle, some may know the name Lynn Castle, she was called the Lady Barber. And that's the song that she kind of was known for. I think Jack Nietzsche was involved in this album. But she was a songwriter, and I think the story was somebody wanted to record her. And she's got a really interesting voice, kind of husky. But a lot of these are kind of big demos. The Lady Barber as a song is a fun song, and I believe that's in that 45 box set as well. But yeah, just good stuff. And a lot of these groups are gathered on the in the big box that I showed you. But that's Lee Hazlewood's solo career. I recommend starting with the singles collection just as a starting point, and then maybe the Cowboy in Sweden, and then branching out from there. But I'll just go ahead and warn you that it is a treasure trove of riches and a lot of really, really good material. And I often wonder why Lee isn't regarded more highly and more well known, because it seems like he was involved with a lot of great people in the 60s. But I know as a solo artist, he just didn't have a lot of hits, and he wasn't like a hit maker in the sense that people knew who he was, even though he was around a lot of movers and shakers in that scene, and really for a long time. I mean, you think his career goes back to the mid 50s, and it spans all the way through the 70s that Lee was involved, and then to have a sort of a cult following comeback. But that's my overview on Lee Hazlewood. If you like the video, comment, subscribe, share. I appreciate it. Everyone that interacts with me here, your comments really do mean a lot to me, and I do take them to heart. And if you would, follow me on Instagram and Twitter. It's TommyBurton75. I usually post pictures of what I'm spinning on there, and so if you like to follow me there, that's a great way to keep up with what I'm listening to. And also, I have another channel, Daily Records. You can get the link up there in my little box above my videos. But Daily Records, where I kind of do a different record every day, almost different style. Having a lot of fun with that. But thank you guys for watching, and if you have any questions about Lee or anything, let me know, and I will try to get an answer for you. In the meantime, I hope you guys have an excellent weekend, and thanks for watching.